this main topic is going to be all about the January camp roster. Now, like I said, the roster was released a couple days ago. Vlatko obviously had some very tough decisions to make. Before I get into my thoughts on the roster, there's a couple considerations that we have to take into account. So, a couple days before they were able to announce the roster, Alex Morgan was diagnosed with COVID, so she's obviously out of the roster for January. That eliminates another forward. And that's no surprise. But one other thing that I noticed, and I'm sure a lot of you noticed, is that Tobin Heath and Kristen Press were also not in the roster. The reason being for that is I believe they just wanted to avoid travel and just kind of stay in England to avoid potentially contracting coronavirus because, like I kind of mentioned earlier, there's been an uptick in COVID cases around the world, so I don't blame them for wanting to stay in England and avoid international duty. Well within the right, and like I said, I don't blame them at all. Stay safe, stay healthy. So that's the reason why you won't see either one of them on this roster. I believe that Tobin and Kristen, I don't know if Kristen's going to be playing in the upcoming WSL games. I believe Tobin is intending to. Like I said, feel free to look around and fact check on that as well. But I just wanted to throw out those points before we get deep into the roster. Now, let's get into who's actually on the roster. So we'll go kind of back to front. We'll go from goalkeepers to forwards. So for the goalkeepers, Vlatko decided to take these four keepers. So Alyssa Nair, Ashlyn Harris, Aubrey Bledsoe, and Jane Campbell. So the four of them. He took 10 defenders, the likes of which include Emily Sonnet, Becky Sauerbrunn, Midge Purse, Kelly O'Hara, Ellie Krieger, Emily Fox, Crystal Dunn, Abby Dahlkemper, Tina Davidson, and Alana Cook. Moving on to the midfielders now. The midfielders he picked up were Julie Ertz, Lindsay Horan, Jaylene Howell, Rose Lavelle, Andy Sullivan, Sam Mewis, Christy Mewis, Mewtwo, that's exciting, and Katerina Macario. So now we get into the last part of the roster, which is the forwards. The forwards he picked up were Carly Lloyd, Mallory Pugh, Megan Rapinoe, Sophia Smith, and Lynn Williams. So if I had to sum this roster up in one word, surprises. To me, there were quite a few surprises on this list that I didn't know what to expect or not. That's not to say that I think Vlatko did a poor job. I actually think Vlatko did an amazing job picking this January camp roster, especially since it's a pretty big deal. It's the one before the She Believes Cup that's going to be coming up here in February, so he's going to want to see people clicking on all cylinders, and he's going to want to start preparing for the Summer Olympics, which of course is going to be coming up here in July. So it was really, really interesting. That's just my general thought that he picked a good roster. So let's kind of go through each of these sections and let's talk about some of the surprises that I'm referring to. Now, there weren't surprises all over this roster, if I'm being honest. In fact, there are some positions and players that were picked that I think they're pretty predictable. The goalkeepers I'm the least surprised of in that group. Alyssa Nair, Ashlyn Harris, Aubrey Bledsoe, Jane Campbell. I don't think anybody else was even in the conversation, to be completely honest, to be in that group. I think those are the four most elite keepers that the United States has, and it's no surprise they picked them. Plus, he's picked in some fashion all four of them in like the last 3 or 4 camps, so not a ton of surprises there. And I think he did a good job in picking that particular group. It's got a few more goalkeeper, like maybe one more goalkeeper in there that I thought, but what I'm thinking is he wants to see probably Aubrey Bledsoe and Jane Campbell duke it out. Maybe he's trying to figure out who's going to be the second keeper to back up Alyssa Nair. I still think it's Ashlyn Harris because of the amount of goalkeeping experience that she has, and I still think that she's more talented than Aubrey and Jane. Might be a bit of a hot take for some, but for me, I think Ashlyn is still the bona fide backup in the squad. So the next least surprising group for me, moving on a little bit into the next topic here, the midfielders is the next least surprising group that I found in this particular roster. The inclusion of Andy Sullivan is a little interesting. Like I said, not too surprising because she's been a solid midfielder for a while now, and I believe she still has a ton of potential to bring to the squad. But you've got Julie Ertz, Lindsay Horan, Rose Lavelle, Sam Mewis. That rotating four that's kind of been a staple in their squad since the 2019 World Cup and earlier. no surprise they want to include all four of them, and they've proven time and time again that they're just studs. The one thing that I'm surprised is that I thought Rose was still injured, but apparently not if she's in the January camp. Kind of feeds my conspiracy theory that a lot of U.S. women's national team players are injured for club play, but are never injured for international play. I'll talk about that someday. That's one of my many conspiracy theories. But nonetheless, I'm a little surprised that Jaylene Howell ended up making this roster. I don't know if he is still looking to maybe fill up a fifth midfield spot, and that's why he took eight midfielders. Overall, I it's hard to say because for me, Katerina Macario would logically be that fifth midfielder. He's, in my opinion, it seems as though Vlatko is really high on Katerina Macario because of the fact that he's talked in the press a couple of times about getting her eligible so that she has the chance to play in the Summer Olympics. They've gotten her citizenship. They got that back in October. They recently said after they submitted the roster that they're really close to getting her eligible from FIFA. I believe they're in the closing stages of that. I believe what they had to do was is they had to get a waiver from FIFA or submit a waiver to FIFA that would grant her eligibility. I'll actually talk about that in a main topic later in the logistics of that because it gets a little confusing. FIFA laws are weird. But overall, those are my general thoughts for the midfielders. Not a ton of surprises, some irregular not irregularities, some interesting picks, but overall, that's what we got. Now let's move on to the defenders. So Vlatko picked up 10 defenders, which to me is really, really strange. The reason it's strange is because it tells me that I think he's undecided on who else he wants to take into the Olympics. That's why he's got such a big sample size, right? He wants to see, okay, I'm going to expand my reach a little bit. I'm going to get a bigger sample size because I think I've got a solid pool to put together and pick out who's going to be the best player going into this summer. Now, of course, there's going to be defenders in this list that are tried, true, proven, and always perform at a high level. I'm talking Becky Sauerbrunn, Abby Dahlkemper, Crystal and Kelly O'Hara. I think as long as those four stay healthy, they're shoe-ins for the Summer Olympics without a doubt. But the others, Alana Cook was a surprise for me being included. She's played really well at PSG this year, but she flew under my radar, so there's that. Tierna Davidson, Emily Fox, Ali Krieger, Midge Person, Emily Sonnet. The remaining six, I think he'll take two. I think he'll take six defenders total to the Summer Olympics with him. And I believe in that remaining group of six, he's trying to vie out which two he's gonna pick. I have my opinions on who he's gonna pick. I think he's gonna end up taking, provided that they play well, Ali Krieger and Tanner Davidson. But with how many extra defenders he's picked up in this camp, it tells me he's not quite sure. He wants to get a second look at a lot of these other players. Emily Fox included, which I thought was really interesting. I believe she recently graduated or is graduating from UNC. I don't really know a ton about Emily Fox, to be honest. I know a lot of other people in the fandom do, so feel free to enlighten me in the comments below if you have more information on her. I couldn't find a ton on her other than that she played at UNC, so there's that. But I think it's interesting because that sixth defender, I have a feeling that Midge Purse could make a case and possibly be picked over Tiernan Davidson or maybe even Ali Krieger. Who knows? But I think that this is going to be the most interesting battle in the entire roster as to what that sixth defender is going to be, or that fifth and sixth defender is going to be. If Midge Purse plays well and proves that she can be versatile enough to not play on the wing but play in defense, I think there's a chance because much like Crystal Dunn has kind of made that transition, maybe Vlatko sees that opportunity in Midge Purse. That's a lot of upside, and she's really versatile, so who knows? Tierna Davidson, I think, is a very solid player, so I think she makes a little bit more of a case than Midge Purse can, but I think if Midge Purse plays really, really well, she's got a shot. I think it's a safe bet to say Ali Krieger is going to make that Olympic roster because I still think she's got a ton of talent behind her. I think that she is one of the most experienced players in the squad aside from Megan Rapinoe, Carly Lloyd, Ashlyn Harris. And I know experience isn't everything when you're looking at a roster, but the reality of it is that you got to make the most of your chances, you got to make the most of your opportunities in these big tournaments. And when you want somebody who's seen these big moments before and knows how to cope with them, Ali Krieger can do that. Plus, like I said, she's still one of the most talented defenders in the world. So I would feel much more comfortable having her in the squad backing up a Crystal Dunn or a Kelly O'Hara should either one of them get injured. More so than the other players, I think he can afford to bring in one young player to sort of supplement the squad because how likely is it that one of the four defenders that you have is going to get injured? But we'll see. Time will tell. All right. So let's get into this last little tidbit of the roster, and that's the forwards. I think things got really spicy when Alex Morgan, that is, got COVID-19 and announced it earlier in this week because I think it really shook up the forwards that Vlatko selected. So if Alex Morgan, Kristen Press, and Tobin Heath opt in, I think this forward group changes completely. Actually, let me back up. I don't think it changes completely, but I think he takes fewer defenders, if that makes any sense. He'd probably take 9 defenders and 6 forwards rather than 10 defenders and 5 forwards, if you're following me here. But some of the bigger surprises, I didn't know Carly Lloyd has recovered from her injury. That was a big surprise for me. The last I heard was in the middle of the summer when Carly wasn't playing with Sky Blue. I just heard that she was injured, and I did a ton of research, and just she had never specified really, other than in interviews on different podcasts, that she was healing. I didn't know she was fully recovered, so that's excellent. Same with Mallory Pugh. Mallory Pugh has been injured to me for like ever, and I think she only played 30 minutes for Sky Blue over in 2020, which Challenge Cup and Fall Series, so that's about like 7, 8, 9 games in total. But I thought Mallory Pugh was still for sure injured, and that kind of fits the bill because it seems like she picks up a ton of injury during club play. But I'm glad to see her in the roster. I didn't have, if she was healthy, I had a feeling she would make it, but I just didn't know if she was healthy. So now here we are. Megan Rapinoe, this was one that I was, like I said, if some of these players are not injured and they want to play, I had no doubt that they'd be on the roster. But I just didn't know if Megan Rapinoe wanted to play. I picked her in my prediction for the Summer Olympic roster. I still stand by that, of course. But I think this is really telling to me that Megan Rapinoe still has, mentally, she still has a stake in the game. She still wants to play. She still wants to give it all for her teammates and get out there and represent the U.S. So it was really cool to see her in the roster, but I think that bodes really well and interesting to see how that forward competition is going to translate as we get closer to the Olympics. I believe I heard a few pundits this week saying that there's a possibility that maybe Lynn Williams and Megan Rapinoe are kind of battling for a spot on this Olympic roster. And with Megan Rapinoe being included in the January camp, it makes it a lot more interesting. Uh, the one thing that I was a little surprised about, and this is one of those players that's kind of on the bubble for me, Sophia Smith. Now, I talked about on the podcast last week that Sophia Smith was on my list of bubble players, if you will. I think if Alex Morgan, Kristen Press, and Tobin Heath are in this roster, I don't think Sophia's in it. Reason being is because at that point you'd have a lot of cooks in the kitchen in the forward line. You'd have a ton of players to choose from. I think with that, that's mainly the reason that Sophia Smith is in this January camp. Not saying Sophia Smith's a bad player. I think she's quite talented. First pick in the draft in 2019. But that's kind of where I stand with Sophia Smith. I think she made it as sort of a bubble player. Lynn Williams, I'm not really too surprised that she's in the January camp roster. Vlatko really likes her. I mean, Vlatko has played her a lot in camps. He's picked her pretty often. Seems to watch her play quite a bit. I think he rates her highly. And as time sort of goes on, I'm getting more and more convinced that perhaps he'll pick both Megan Rapinoe and Lynn Williams in the Summer Olympic roster. I could see, so like I said, as time goes on and you learn information, your predictions, they become a little bit more solidified, they change. But like with this particular roster, I wouldn't be surprised if the forward line, permitted they're all healthy and they want to play, would include Carly Lloyd, Mallory Pugh, Megan Rapinoe, Lynn Williams, Alex Morgan, Kristen Press, and Tobin Heath. Taking 7 forwards into the Olympics is a little bit bold, if you will, because then you're left with, let's see, I'm going to do some math in my head, only 9 other spots. So that's just the tough part about being the U.S. Women's National Team coach is you just have to make those tough calls. And I'm thinking that that's the 7 player pool that he's going to pick from in terms of forwards. I don't think he'll take all 7 because now that I think about it, that's you don't want over a third of your roster just being forwards because you got to have defenders to stop the ball from rolling into the goal. But Vlatko's got a lot to think about between now and the Olympics, and I think this roster and this January camp is an excellent time for him to start having those conversations. And I think the She Believes Cup will also be very telling as to the state of some of these players that he's watching a little bit more closely. I think for this camp he'll focus a little bit more on defenders, but maybe I don't want to say it was a blessing, but maybe with Tobin, Kristen, and Alex not playing it maybe helped him out a little bit because now he has more room to have different players come in so he can get a look at it. So that's just an interesting perspective and spin on things. But those are my overall reflections and thoughts on the roster. I think, like I said, Vlatko's got a lot of deciding to do. I expect him to shake things up quite a bit in the 2 friendlies against Colombia. What are your thoughts on the U.S. Women's National Team January camp roster, everybody? Comment below and let me know, of course.